Thank you, Reverend Catherine. So delighted to be here. And I'm so grateful that Reverend Michelle has given me this opportunity to speak about a subject that I am personally so passionate about after talking about and researching receiving for about 20 years or so. And thank you for the people who recommended my book to Reverend Michelle as well. That's been really wonderful. So many of you have seen the first two talks that Reverend Michelle gave or listened to them. And she's done just such a beautiful job of talking about kind of giving an understanding of what receiving is. And then in her second sermon, about really cultivating receiving. I'm here today to talk about embracing receiving. And when I was thinking about my talk, I was thinking, and this really takes me back 20 years, that it's very difficult to embrace something that you don't value. That really you have to know about it, you have to understand it, but importantly you have to value it, or it's just kind of an abstract principle of, yeah, receiving sounds really great, but really how do I apply it into my personal life in a way that is helpful to me on a day-to-day basis. And this is, in fact, what I faced 20 years ago when my clients began talking about how frustrated they were. They were giving and giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. And they were talking about, I'm not really getting back what I'm giving to others. They were feeling a lack of reciprocity in their important relationships, and they were frustrated. They were resentful. They were exhausted. And they were saying, Amanda, when is it going to be my turn? What can I do about this? Or how can I get people who aren't giving to be more giving? And as I thought about this, I thought, it's interesting that we hear so much about the giver, but we don't hear about the receiver, although every act of giving has a recipient. There's a receiver for every giver. And I started thinking about that, and I thought, who is this receiver? Why do we never talk about receiving? How can I help my clients? And really, what is receiving? And that really started me on a journey to answer that question, which ultimately really transformed my life and even brought me to Arizona. But so as I began thinking about receiving, I thought, well, first you have to value receiving. And I thought, in a culture that teaches us that it is better to give than receive, then how do we value that? And as I was kind of pondering on this question, I came across a little story about monks in the Himalayas training for their own evolution over decades. And in this very short story, these monks were asked to go down into the street and beg for alms. And that was the end of the story. And back then when I was reading it, I didn't even know that this was common in Buddhist cultures. So I just read this story and I thought, isn't that interesting? I thought it would really take a lot to really kind of hold out your hands that way and beg. And I thought you'd have to put your ego to the side. You'd have to have a really kind of great attitude, I thought, of that you're giving the gift to somebody else, of giving to you. And the more I thought about it, I thought this is really an expression of spirituality, an incredible expression. It's almost that we are kind of one, this is like a unity principle, that giving and receiving are flip sides of the same coin. And I thought this is so interesting because in my culture, our culture, we turn away from people who beg. If somebody is really in need, we feel embarrassed to see them. We feel embarrassed for them as well, let alone the people who are in a position of need, what they feel and some of the humiliation and shame that they feel. So this was a very different way for me to think about receiving. As soon as I thought of receiving as being spiritual, I thought, I want to learn how to receive. I thought, okay, I value it. I want to know how to do it, but I still didn't know what to do. I thought I could wait around until someone offers to give me something, but I thought progress would be glacial if I did that. If back then, and if this is at all like you, nobody was banging down my door anymore to give anything to me. So I thought I have to kind of rethink this. And I thought, well, part of the whole thing about receiving is that we don't really have a vocabulary for receiving. We don't have a way to think about it. So if we think of receiving, we can think of a lot of people, I think of passivity or somebody just kind of laying around with their feet up, waiting to be waited on. But actually receiving is a very dynamic state. And one of the first things that I did is I wanted to separate the act of doing from the act of giving. And the way I've come to frame this is for every doer, there's a taker. For every giver, there's a receiver. Every doer has a taker. Every giver has a receiver.